Every road has a story. Some are told, and some are found along the way. Here, we bring those stories to life. Stories of people, moments, and the quiet spaces between them. Whether you're walking alone, driving through the night, or just looking for a voice to keep you company, this is Road Tales, and this story begins now. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far beyond the deserts and the mountains, there lived a king who ruled with mercy and wisdom. His palace stood at the heart of a vast city, surrounded by rivers, gardens, and walls of white stone that glowed like ivory in the morning sun. The people loved him because he cared for them, not as a ruler above, but as a man among them. He was known across the lands as the just king, a man whose heart was as generous as the sky, and whose patience seemed endless. Every dawn, while the city still slept and the air carried the chill of the night, the king would leave his palace gates, wearing no crown and no sign of royalty. He walked alone through the narrow streets, listening to the merchants preparing their stalls, the farmers driving their carts, and the whispers of life awakening across his realm. He believed that to rule well, one must hear the pulse of the people with his own ears. On one such morning, as he walked along the road that led beyond the city walls, he came upon the royal orchard, a wide field filled with fruit trees and flowing water channels that reflected the pale light of dawn. There, amid the soft rustle of the wind and the murmur of leaves, he heard a faint sound, like a sigh, or perhaps a soft cry of pain. It was a sound that did not belong to the morning peace. He followed it through the garden until he found a small serpent trapped between thorns. Its scales shimmered faintly, green and gold under the rising light, and its body was twisted in pain as it tried to free itself. The king stood still for a moment, watching. Around him, the guards kept their distance, whispering warnings to each other. Yet the king did not move with fear, but with quiet compassion. He knelt beside the creature, slowly pushing away the thorns until the serpent slid free. Its body trembled, weak and bloodied, but its eyes lifted to meet his. For a brief moment, man and creature looked at each other, one filled with power and mercy, the other with pain and instinct, and something silent passed between them. The serpent turned and vanished into the grass without a sound. The king rose and wiped the dirt from his hands. He looked toward the horizon and felt a strange calm settle over him. He had done nothing more than what felt natural to his heart, yet somehow the act carried weight beyond its simplicity. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the serpent faded into the rhythm of life. The king continued his walks, tended to his people, and held court with fairness and grace. The kingdom prospered, and peace seemed to rest upon it like a gentle breeze. But one morning, when the dawn was pale and the air still cool, a guard at the palace gate noticed something unusual. A serpent, small and slender, glided across the marble steps toward the entrance. The man lifted his spear in alarm, but stopped when he saw that the creature carried something in its mouth, a coin that gleamed like sunlight. The serpent placed it gently upon the ground, looked up toward the gate, and then disappeared as quietly as it had come. The guard stared for a long moment, uncertain if what he had seen was real. Then he picked up the coin and brought it to the king. It was pure gold, unlike any coin minted in the realm. No mark, no inscription, only the weight of value and the shimmer of something mysterious. The king listened to the story and smiled, faintly. "Let it be," he said. "Perhaps it is a message, or perhaps it is nothing. We shall see if it returns." And return it did. The next morning, and the one after that, and the one after still. Each dawn the serpent came, laid down a single piece of gold, and vanished. It never crossed the gate, never hissed, nor raised its head in threat. It came with the calm of routine, as if it had made a silent pact with destiny. The king began to watch from his window each morning, curious and humbled. There was something in this act that touched him, a reminder of how small kindnesses ripple outward in ways unseen. He never spoke of it to the court, though whispers spread through the servants like wind through dry grass. As weeks passed, the gold pieces were gathered and placed in a small chest, kept separate from the kingdom's treasury. "These belong not to the crown," said the king quietly, "but to the hand of gratitude that offers them." He saw in that daily gift a reflection of faith, that good, once sown, always finds a way to bloom again. But not every heart in the palace shared his wonder. Among his ministers was a man whose loyalty was hollow, and whose eyes saw only power and advantage. He had served the court for years, his words coated with respect, but his mind thick with envy. He saw the serpent's visits not as a miracle, but as a threat, a symbol that something beyond his reach had touched the king's favor. In private, he whispered among the other courtiers, "A serpent brings gold to our king," he said. "What creature gives without taking? There is sorcery in this, or deceit. Perhaps the serpent is no gift of mercy, but a spirit drawn by pride." His whispers grew, feeding on curiosity and fear. The guards began to wonder if the serpent carried a curse in its scales, if the gold was a temptation sent to test the king's wisdom. Yet none dared act without his command, and so they waited in silence each dawn, watching. Still, the serpent came. It moved with patience and precision, each time laying its small offering at the gate, then disappearing into the wild gardens. The king, though aware of the murmurs, refused to turn his heart toward suspicion. He said nothing, for he believed that fear often disguises itself as counsel, and that the purest intentions are tested by doubt. Then came the day that would mark the turning of the tale. The sun had not yet risen when the wicked minister summoned one of the palace guards. He told him that the serpent was dangerous, that it must be killed before its magic ensnared the king. The guard hesitated, for he feared disobeying both his master and the king, but the minister's authority carried the weight of deception well. When dawn broke, the serpent appeared as always, carrying its gold piece between its jaws. It slid across the marble, pausing for a moment as if sensing the air had changed. The guard stood hidden behind one of the columns, spear in hand, his breath shallow. When the serpent turned to leave, he struck. The spear flashed in the morning light and found its mark, not the heart, but the tail. The serpent recoiled in agony, leaving behind a trail of dark blood as it vanished into the gardens. The sound of the spear echoed faintly, and then silence returned. The guard stood motionless, shaken by what he had done. When the minister approached, the man's hands trembled, but the minister's voice was calm. "Say nothing," he ordered. "When the king asks, you will tell him the serpent sought to enter the palace and that you drove it away for his safety." The guard nodded, though his heart was heavy. That morning, when the king came to the window as he always did, there was no movement below, no glint of gold, no sign of life. He waited, thinking perhaps the serpent would come late, but the marble steps remained empty. For the first time in many months, the dawn brought no gift. He felt a hollow quiet settle over him. The air outside seemed colder, the garden less alive. He asked the guards what had happened, and the minister stepped forward with practiced ease. He told the king that the serpent had tried to enter the palace and that he, fearing for the king's life, had ordered it to be driven away. The king said nothing. His eyes, calm and deep, held a sorrow that words could not express. He simply turned away, leaving the minister to bask in his false triumph. But inside, the king felt the weight of loss pressing on him like a shadow. It was not the loss of gold nor of wonder, but of something purer, the quiet bond between a merciful act and the unseen hand that had returned it. That night, the palace was silent. The corridors echoed with the distant wind, and even the fountain seemed to murmur softly, as if mourning. The king sat alone in his chamber, unable to rest. He thought of the serpent, the fragile creature he had freed, and of how the world repays kindness with suspicion, loyalty with betrayal. He wondered if mercy, in a world so full of fear, could ever truly endure. Days passed in a quiet that felt like waiting. The palace carried an unease that no one dared to name. The courtiers went about their duties with measured voices. The servants moved softly as though not to disturb some invisible balance. And the king himself seemed distant, like a man who had seen the shape of truth but could not yet reach it. He spent his mornings now in silence, sitting by the window that overlooked the gardens. The marble courtyard below had become a mirror of his own thoughts, still, cold, and empty. The coin the serpent had left lay upon his table, gleaming faintly each morning in the first light of day. He touched it sometimes, feeling its weight and warmth, as though it contained a pulse not of metal, but of memory. The minister avoided his gaze whenever they crossed paths, though the king never spoke of what had happened. He carried himself with the same calm authority, and that calm was what frightened the minister most. For a man who shouts his anger can be reasoned with, but one who keeps his silence is beyond reach. One night, as the moon rose full and pale over the gardens, a strange wind began to stir. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, though the sky was clear. The king sat alone, as he often did, his thoughts wandering through the corridors of the past. Mercy had once come naturally to him, like breathing, but now he wondered if mercy, unguarded, could invite treachery. He closed his eyes for a moment. In that stillness, he thought he heard something faint, the soft rustle of movement in the distance, like the brushing of scales against stone. He opened his eyes and looked toward the balcony. The night beyond was still, yet his heart began to beat faster. He rose and walked to the window, his gaze tracing the familiar path along the marble steps. And there it was. The serpent had returned. It moved slowly, dragging itself across the stones, its body scarred and weary but alive. The moonlight washed over it, revealing a pattern of dull gold along its back, marks that once shone brightly but now seemed worn by time and pain. It paused at the same place where it had once laid its daily offering. The king felt a strange mix of sorrow and awe. He did not move, for fear that even the slightest sound might break the fragile spell that held this moment together. The serpent lowered its head, and for a long while it did not move at all. Then from its mouth it released something small and dark. It was not a coin this time. It was a scale, one of its own, gleaming faintly in the moonlight before falling upon the marble. The king watched as the serpent turned away and disappeared once more into the shadows of the garden. He stood there long after it was gone, the silence around him filled with meaning he could not yet name. He bent to pick up the scale. It was smooth and warm, like life itself. When he held it between his fingers, it shimmered faintly, just enough to catch the reflection of his own eyes staring back. The next morning, he placed the scale beside the last coin on his table. He told no one what had happened, but the presence of the serpent's token stirred something deep within him. He began to walk the gardens again, tracing the same paths he had walked on that first morning long ago. The scent of jasmine, the whisper of leaves, the song of distant fountains, they all felt changed somehow, as though the garden itself remembered. Days turned into weeks, and the serpent did not return again. Yet the king could not shake the feeling that its shadow lingered, moving unseen through the corners of the world. Meanwhile, the minister's fear grew heavier with each sunrise. He had thought the matter ended, buried under lies and silence. But guilt is a seed that grows even in darkness. He began to see signs where there were none, the glint of gold in the corners of his vision, the hiss of wind through corridors that sounded like breath. Sleep eluded him. He became thin, his eyes hollow. And when he looked upon the king, calm, composed, unreadable, his terror deepened. He began to avoid the throne room altogether, claiming illness, retreating into the private chambers of his house within the palace walls. The king noticed, of course. He noticed everything. But he waited. For truth, he knew, is not something one must chase. It reveals itself in its own time, as surely as dawn follows night. One evening, the king walked alone through the gardens once more. The sun had just set, leaving behind a sky the color of dying embers. He passed by the place where the serpent had last appeared and paused there, his thoughts heavy with remembrance. As the air cooled, he felt a sense of finality in the stillness around him, as though something unseen was preparing to speak. He turned his gaze upward, and in that moment, a single leaf fell from the tree above him, drifting slowly through the air, until it landed upon the stone where the serpent's blood had once stained the ground. There, in the fading light, he saw it, a small gleam, faint but unmistakable. He knelt and brushed the surface with his hand. The soil had hardened over time, but beneath it lay a thread of gold, thin as hair, glimmering faintly. He traced it with his fingers, following its curve, and it led toward the old fountain that stood in the garden center. The water there had long since grown still, but as his hand touched its edge, a ripple formed, spreading outward until the entire surface shimmered with reflected light. And in that reflection, for the briefest instant, he thought he saw the shape of the serpent, coiling and uncoiling, its eyes calm and knowing. Then the image vanished, and only his own reflection remained. He stood there in silence. The air had grown colder, but his heart felt strangely at peace. He understood now that the serpent was not gone. It had merely moved beyond the sight of men, leaving behind its lesson. When he returned to the palace that night, He knew what he must do. The next morning, he summoned his council. The ministers gathered in the great hall, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the marble chamber. The minister of envy came last, pale and trembling, though he tried to hide it behind a mask of obedience. The king addressed them with measured calm, his voice steady and clear. He spoke not of serpents or miracles, but of truth and the weight of deeds. He reminded them that honor cannot be built upon deceit, and that mercy, when betrayed, becomes a judgment unto itself. As he spoke, his gaze rested briefly upon the minister, and though no accusation passed his lips, the man's composure began to crumble. His hands shook, sweat glistened on his brow. When the council was dismissed, the king remained behind. He walked to the window overlooking the gardens and stood there for a long time. Behind him, the minister lingered, unwilling to leave but too afraid to stay. The king did not turn. He simply said, in a voice that carried through the empty hall, "The measure of a man is not found in what he gains, but in what he cannot destroy." Then he left the chamber. That night, the minister fled the palace. No one saw him go, but by morning his chambers were empty. Some said he escaped to the southern deserts. Others whispered that he lost his way in the mountains. The truth was never known. The king spoke no word of him again. But that evening, as he walked once more through the gardens, he found something lying upon the stone by the old fountain, a single golden coin. It was worn and thin, as though it had passed through fire. He picked it up and held it to the fading light. On its surface was etched a faint curve, like the trace of a serpent's tail. He smiled, not in triumph, but in understanding. The serpent had returned, not in body, but in sign. That night, the palace slept under a quiet sky. The storm of the past had long faded, and in its place lingered a strange calm. The kind that comes after truth has taken its course. The gardens shimmered under moonlight, the fountains whispering softly, as though the world itself had exhaled a long, weary breath. The king sat by his window once more, the golden coin resting in his hand. Its edges were worn, its glow dim, yet it felt alive, as if the memory of everything that had passed still pulsed within it. He turned it slowly between his fingers, watching how the light caught the faint serpent-like curve upon its surface. He thought of how far things had come. From the morning he had found a wounded creature among thorns, to the mornings of gold and gratitude, to the silence of betrayal. Every act, every ripple of kindness or envy had led to this still moment. It was not the end, he realized, but the quiet return of balance. The following days carried a sense of renewal. The people noticed that their king seemed changed, gentler in tone, but firmer in judgment. His wisdom had gained an edge that only sorrow could sharpen. He no longer spoke of miracles, nor of curses, but of choices, the kind that define the heart of every man. Under his rule, justice deepened, as though he saw through things that others missed. The ministers served with renewed humility, for the story of the serpent had spread in whispers throughout the palace, though none knew the full truth. The name of the envious minister was never spoken again, as if time itself had erased him. Seasons turned. The golden chest that once held the serpent's offerings remained locked in the treasury, untouched. Yet each spring, when the jasmine bloomed across the garden walls, the king would walk to the fountain where the serpent had last been seen. He would stand there for a while in silence, feeling the wind move gently through the trees, and he would remember. Years passed. The king grew older, his hair turning silver like the edges of the dawn, but his eyes remained clear. He ruled in peace, and his people prospered. Many believed that the serpent had been a spirit sent by heaven to test his mercy. Others said it was only a tale, but the king knew better. He understood that mercy was not a test nor a trade. It was a seed, and like every seed, it grew only in the soil of patience and truth. One morning, many years after the serpent's last visit, the king rose before dawn. It had been long since he had woken so early. The world outside was bathed in the pale blue of first light. He dressed simply, without the weight of his crown, and walked through the quiet halls of his palace toward the gardens. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant flowers. The marble steps glistened faintly with dew. He walked slowly, his hand brushing against the walls as though greeting an old friend. When he reached the fountain, he paused. The water was still, perfectly calm, reflecting the soft glow of morning. And there, upon the edge of the stone, he saw it. A single golden scale. It was smaller than he remembered, lighter, almost translucent. He picked it up carefully, afraid it might vanish at his touch. For a moment, it lay still in his palm, and then, as the sun broke over the horizon, it caught the light and shimmered, not with gold, but with color, like a living thing breathing once more. He smiled, not with surprise, but with quiet recognition. He knew now that the serpent had never left him. Its form had returned to the dust, but its lesson had taken root in his heart. He turned toward the city beyond the garden walls, the city he had built upon fairness and compassion, and felt the peace of understanding settle over him. The serpent had been both creature and mirror, a reflection of mercy and the world's answer to it. Where there was cruelty, it vanished. Where there was gratitude, it shone. That day, the king gathered his scribes and ordered that a small tablet be carved and placed at the palace gate, where the serpent had once laid its gifts. Upon it were written words that would endure for generations. Mercy is the measure of kings. Gratitude is the wealth of the soul. And envy is the poison that kills both giver and gift. Years later, when the king's reign passed into legend, travelers would still visit that gate. Some would touch the stone for good fortune, others would leave a coin in remembrance. And it was said that on certain mornings, when the light was soft and the air was still, a faint glimmer of gold could be seen upon the steps, vanishing when one drew too near, as if the serpent spirit still lingered, keeping silent watch. The story spread far and wide, carried by merchants and poets across mountains and seas. It became not just a tale of a king and a serpent, but of all who had ever offered kindness without expecting reward. In the end, the serpent's greatest gift had not been gold, but wisdom, the reminder that mercy, once given, never dies. It changes form, it travels unseen, and it returns when least expected. And though the king's palace would one day fall to dust and the gardens grow wild, the lesson remained, whispered by wind and remembered by hearts. For every act of mercy sows a light that time itself cannot extinguish. And if you've reached this far into the story, remember that every tale carries a piece of truth, and every listener keeps that truth alive If you enjoyed The King and the Serpent, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who love timeless stories from the ancient world. Your support helps keep these tales alive, one story and one heart at a time.